This call is now being recorded.
Hello, welcome to the V2V podcast with Shorts and Aurelius. This is the interview. My name is Aurelius, and tonight we're talking with Bill Boyles. He's a writer, child welfare advocate, and also a survivor of what we're going to be discussing, which is what's commonly referred to as the troubled teen industry, therapeutic boarding schools, an area of concern that I think most people don't know about. I certainly was not that aware of kind of what goes on behind the scenes when parents and children are separated for a variety of reasons and the children go into these programs. So thanks for coming on the show, Bill.
Well, thanks for having me.
So what is the troubled teen industry? How would you kind of describe that whole world?
Well, you kind of touched on it with the therapeutic boarding schools, although it's bigger than that. It's kind of a broad term for the constellation of therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers, brat camps, you hear them called sometimes, boot camps, private psychiatric facilities. There's some public psychiatric facilities. All these facilities that claim to treat kids or offer therapy in a residential setting away from home. The treatment, that the conditions that they treat vary from psychiatric problems to addictions, even like stuff like video game addictions, not just drug addictions, or sex addictions, food addictions. Some of them offer gay conversion therapy. The truth is that really, for the most part, they'll take your child no matter what. But it's all like a kind of private network of treatment, quote unquote, treatment centers, and kind of, I guess you could call them like an alternative shadow network of juvies, private juvies, where mostly adolescent kids are held, at their parents' request generally.
So I'm more familiar with adult rehab. It's somewhat in my field. I've been trained as a drug and alcohol counselor, and I know that world is pretty shady in large part. But I think maybe the difference is that when an adult voluntarily checks himself into rehab with all of the problems that are associated with the rehabs in general, that adult is always free to leave at any time. There's something I like to say to clients on occasion. It's that I need to punch a code to get into the building, but the door swings wide open for anybody who wants to leave. And that certainly isn't the case with children. Is it not true that essentially the parents are signing over their parental rights to these organizations so that the organization itself has custody over the kids?
So a couple of things there. One thing is not all adults are free to leave rehab. In some cases, adults are involuntarily committed to rehab either by court order. There's something in some states in Florida, it's called the Marchman Act, where like family members can petition a judge to have an addict committed, or a judge can order them like through drug court or something like that. And one thing you notice is that rehabs that focus on that kind of business tend to be more problematic or engage in more problematic activities. For instance, I read a news report not that long ago about a supposed rehab where people were being court ordered. I think it was in Oklahoma, and they were basically just forcing the guys that were ordered there to work in a chicken processing plant. They weren't doing any kind of treatment or anything like that. They were just like basically treating them like slave labor. And, that is not an unusual, like if you had replaced those guys with teenagers, that would be a very believable account of a troubled teen industry kind of program. And so
Sure.
I think that's part of what is the issue, is that these programs typically do not require any kind of due process to commit your children. In other words, there's no judge, there's no hearing. It's basically just a transaction between the parent and the program, where the parent comes to the program and asks them to take the kid. And of course, some programs say that they do vetting. Some even do vetting or pretend to do vetting. But in the end, the program is going to make money by taking the kid. In some cases, a lot of money. I mean, a lot of these places can cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year per kid. And so, they have a huge financial incentive to take the kid. And so it's unrealistic to think that they are going to be rigorously vetting kids and turning down kids that don't fit their criteria. And so, that is a lot of the problem. And then as far as the custody thing goes, I hear about some programs doing that. In my experience, that is not quite, legally speaking, that's not quite what's happening. Generally, what's happening is the programs are being granted like a temporary guardianship of the child. So they do that so that they can do stuff like, if there's an emergency, they can have the child brought to a hospital or treated medically without needing the parent's consent. That's not a terribly unusual or sinister arrangement. For instance, my parents had a friend a couple who were their friends that had a 17-year-old daughter, and they had to move to Chicago for work. My parents lived in Florida, and these people lived like a couple streets away. And they had a daughter who was going to be a senior in high school that year, and she didn't want to have to change schools all the way to another state in her senior year. So my parents let her live at their house and continue to attend her same school. And they had one of those arrangements so that if something had happened to her, that they could, take care of the situation. So in and of itself, it's not a terribly sinister thing, but, the programs, and it can be revoked by your actual parents. So it's not like the parents are necessarily signing over their custodial rights. And if they show up at the program and want to take the kid out, then the program will deny them or whatever. So that's,
well, I'd like to make it. Yeah, sure. No, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no,
I'd like to make a distinction. So in my background, going back to kind of the punitive measures or the centers or treatment facilities that there's some kind of due process involved with, where it's court ordered, or like you're going to go here, you're going to go to jail. That's how I'm generally familiar with. It's more of the situation where, I'm an adult. I obviously have a problem with drugs, alcohol, generally speaking, and I want to go somewhere to learn how to live differently, voluntarily, generally through insurance, unless I've got the money to pay $2,000 a day, at times to get quote unquote treatment. And I'm not like necessarily praising that system, but even with adults, generally speaking, these facilities are all about retention, of course, because that's how they're going to earn their money. So they are going to do everything they can to keep you there. When it comes to kids, though, the distinction is that, generally speaking, it's not, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not about necessarily a legal thing. It's just that the parents are, with their authority, are saying, here's my kid, here's the funds to pay to take my kid. We're going to sign, agree to consent agreements so that essentially we're going to back off, and you can make some of these decisions that concern my child because this is quote unquote therapy. So I can understand why any place like that would do their utmost to both keep the child there against their will or otherwise, or convince the parents that it's in their and their children's best interest to continue. Now,
well, if I could, you touched on
go ahead.
two really important things there, right? And one is the idea that, the question of who is the client and what is the product. So in a voluntary adult rehab, where the person who's being treated can leave at any time, they are the client, and the treatment is the product. And so the financial incentive in that case is to give the client the best experience possible so that they will stay and continue paying. But in one of these these teenage programs, the child is not the one paying for the treatment. The parent is. And so in that case, because of that arrangement, in effect, the parent becomes the client. The parent is the one that seeks the treatment. The parent is the one that's paying, and so the parent is the client. And so because of that, the treatment is not the product anymore. The child is the product. And so what they are selling is they are selling you, the kid that you want or the kid that you wish you had, or what they're selling is not the treatment. They're selling the fact that they're going to fix your kid from whatever problem, real or imaginary, that they can convince you that exists. And so that changes the dynamics so much. It's, it reminds me in a way of Facebook, where, you're not paying to use Facebook. You're not the client of Facebook. The advertisers are the client of Facebook. You are the product that Facebook is offering to the advertisers, right? And so, and that's what's going on in these teenage programs, right? And so the incentive is not to keep the kid happy or treat the kid well. The incentive is to keep the parent happy. And how you do that is by coercing what we like to call the program testimonial. And if you go to these websites for these places, you'll see over and over, you'll see one phrase, such and such program saved my life or saved my kid's life. And ultimately, that's how these programs attract more business. And so that is what they're set up to produce. They're set up to produce kids that are going to tell mommy and daddy whatever they want to hear to get out, because it's horrible. They're going to tell them, oh, thank you for sending me. I'm so sorry. I love you. Whatever it takes to get out of that abusive, terrible situation. And they're going to, give the program glowing reviews so that they can suck in more parents. And, and when you think of it that way, you realize that the best interests of the child are not going to be foremost in these programs' minds. Their focus is the parents. And so, to that end, and that's why you get stuff like the restriction of communication with the parents, because, and that's a typical process. These places censor letters. They listen in on phone calls. When I was in my program, you had to be in the program for several months and go through a bunch of stuff and earn a certain level, you know, by behaving and following the rules and all this, to even earn a phone call with your parents. It was 10 minutes. And you sat down in a room across from a staff member, and it was a telephone with 2 headsets. And they silently listened on one, and you were talking on the other, and they had their hand on the cradle the entire time. And the second you would cross the line, they would hang up that phone call. And then you would, you know, obviously be facing some penalties for crossing the line. And, you know, if you look at handbooks, a lot of it is focused on your kids are going to tell you they're being abused. They're going to tell you all this horrible stuff. It's not true. They're just manipulating to get out. And that's the danger. So, you know, when you're paying
this sounds all very familiar. This sounds all very familiar with even with adults, but let me switch it up a little bit. And
sure.
So we understand the mechanics of getting someone there and keeping them there. So I want to play devil's advocate for a moment and say, well, that's all, you know, that's all normal, and this is kind of the way these facilities operate. It may not be the best way to do things, but it's the effective way to do things. And so, but my kid is a problem, and what I want to know is what the problem is, like, with the place, like because from all I can see, all the testimonials, all of the glowing reviews that you were referring to, it seems like a reasonable place. If I put myself in the position of someone who has an obnoxious kid, or a kid who's on quote unquote drugs, or
you mean a teenager, a regular
teenager, right? I've got a teenager and I don't know what to do with him, right?
Yeah.
So I've got the resources to do this. You know, I need a break. So what's the problem? Like, what's really going on in these therapeutic environments, quote unquote therapeutic environments, that is the issue? Because just because I'm restricted in phone calls and in movement and you know, the things that I want to do as opposed to the things that I need to do, you know, maybe that's okay. But what I want to hear from you is why these places, generally speaking, and I guess we have to be general unless you want to, because getting specific, I guess one institution.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, let's not do it.
but generally speaking, so what? And I kind of already know some of these answers, but what's the problem with these places? Like, what do they actually do to these kids?
Well, let's start with one thing. Let's say you're the parent of an obnoxious child or whatever, a child on drugs. So my first question, teenager. Right. So let's not lose sight. And you know, I mean, unfortunately, in this country, we have criminalized teenage behavior. Normal teenage behavior do a lot of things, but you know, I mean, every generation freaks out about their teenagers. I mean, in the 60s, it was, you know, people freaking out because their kids were hippies or whatever. And now what are these hippies doing? They're lawyers.
Oh, the Egyptians. 6,000 years ago, the Egyptians and hieroglyphs wrote on the walls.
Yeah.
Our children aren't listening to us any longer.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So yeah, and I mean, this is the human condition, to have angst about the generation that comes after you.
Of course.
And so you know, I mean, teenagers, the teenage years are a time to explore, they're a time to rebel, they're a time to find yourself. And sometimes, and I'm not trying to minimize, sometimes kids do get hooked on drugs, sometimes they do engage in dangerous behaviors. I'm not claiming that all kids that get sent to these programs were just engaging in teenage behaviors, but some of them were. It's, you know, but even the case of like let's say your kid is on drugs. I mean, when we say drugs, I mean, that's a big thing. Are they smoking a joint every now and then, or having beer every now and then, or are they shooting up heroin or smoking crack? You know, I mean, that's a big range. Oh, my kid's on drugs.
It certainly is. But regardless, I want some help. But I want some, like, empathetic, effective help, like the kind of thing that I'm reading in your brochure on the internet. You know, so what is my kid really in for when he shows up there?
So, I can tell you about my experience. So when I got sent to the program, it started with waking up. So the first question is, how do you get your kid there?
Right.
I mean, you're not going to sit them down and be like, I'm sending you to this program. And, all the jet skis on the brochure cover in the world are not going to convince a kid to go to this program for the most part, right?
True.
Remember, they're a rebellious teenager. Even if it sounded great, they would probably tell you to F off. So,
I'm not going to leave my friends and my own activities, and no.
So for a reasonable fee, say $1,000, $2,000, the program, sometimes $5,000, the program will arrange to have what they call transporters come get your kid. These are people that are like off-duty cops or retired cops, or usually like some kind of a law enforcement or private investigative background. They show up in your house. They essentially privately arrest your kid, which is what happened to me. I woke up one morning, about 5 in the morning, like 3 dudes busted into my room. They put me in handcuffs. They dragged me out of the house. And they threw me in the back of the car, and they took me to the airport. And they hauled me from one airport to another at threat of being tased, all the way to Utah, which is like kind of the epicenter of all this stuff, is, in Utah. And, when I got to the program, it was a short-term intake facility that was operated by the chain of programs that I went to called WASP, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs. Mm-hmm. And they took me in, they stripped me naked, they made me use flea shampoo or delousing shampoo, and then they put me in like a hospital robe, and it was too short, and my butt was hanging out. Not to be graphic here, but I'm a 14-year-old boy. I was a virgin. I was not experienced in the ways of the world. And here I am in this co-ed facility in a hospital room with my ass crack hanging out and my balls hanging out, the bottom of my robe. And, every time I sit down, my junk's on display, and I'm insecure about my body. And, it actually took me a long time to realize that was sexual abuse. Because when you think about sexual abuse, you mostly think about unwanted touching or, rape. But that's not always what it is. We saw a recent case with Johnny Doe who operated a program called Midwest Academy. He would make the girls undress in front of him and in front of a mirror, and he would kind of point out stuff about their body. And even without, and he was accused of some other stuff with other students that got further than that. But even without all of that, that's clearly abuse of a sexual nature, that's sexual abuse. And so any kind of sexual humiliation like that is abusive. And so, eventually they gave me my clothes back, and I spent a week there, and then they flew me all the way to a little country in the Pacific called Samoa, and I was strip searched again and got through the whole thing. And, it's bad. The therapy, the quote-unquote therapy that most of these programs use is attack therapy, where the students are pitted against each other and they give each other, feedback of a very adversarial nature, and it's designed to, break you down. They do stuff, they throw you in a uniform, they shave your head. It's very tightly regimented, like at our program. Stuff like speaking without permission at all could get you in trouble. Making facial expressions could get you in trouble. Crossing your legs is often against the rules. Just sitting in a chair, cross your feet, you get in trouble. Some of the programs that are, in buildings, particularly in the U.S., have rules that if you look out a window, you are penalized as if you were trying to run away from the facility. And so you're in this very tightly structured environment, and then, your parents are told to not believe you. You have no open communication with them. Your parents are told you're a liar. So even if you did, they wouldn't believe you. And so, all the kids are considered liars and drug addicts and all this stuff. And that's not you can probably tell me as a drug counselor, that's not a good way to develop a therapeutic relationship.
No, there's a concept that we use, called, excuse me, let me, gather my thoughts here. It's called Unconditional Positive Regard. So basically, as an adult having a problem. Oh, by the way, when we do what we call a body scan or basically disrobe, we'll get a visual of you to make sure you're not bringing drugs into the facility. It's only with men looking at other men and women looking at other women, only, ever. And so, I mean, even the level of like respect in that sense is greater than with an adult, like examining a young lady, man.
Well, and it bears pointing out that when you're doing that to an adult who consented.
Right, and that's the important part too. These are adults, but the thing I was referring to about unconditional positive regard is that when someone has a problem or they're in quote unquote flight mode, like they want to get out of there, like the idea is that you listen to them, take into account what they're saying, have some empathy for the situation, and tell them that they're okay. Like, that's cool. Like, it's okay to have these feelings. It's okay to look out the window and want to go home.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay. There's like I said, in these other cases with adults, I think this is a good contrast too, is that these people are here for a reason. And a lot of times with children, they may not even be aware critically of the reason they're there, other than what someone told them, I guess, in a lot of respects. So so that's different too.
Yeah.
But this is all very disturbing to me. I'm getting like, upset.
Yeah. It is disturbing and it is upsetting. I mean, and to think that you could somehow develop a helpful relationship with a child when that relationship started with kidnapping them and telling them that, they're a terrible person or that their family doesn't want them in the family unit anymore. I mean, that is not going to develop a helpful therapeutic relationship. And so what they do is they make up for it with all the rules, and a lot of mental conditioning that, you could probably, without exaggeration, in many cases called brainwashing. In some cases it involves cultish, large group awareness training seminars, like LGAT seminars. These are like, the most popular examples are like, LifeSpring, Landmark Forum, EST, they're very cultish. And so they use that to kind of brainwash the kids, and they condition certain privileges like being able to communicate with your parents, upon completion of these, essentially brainwashing sessions.
Right. Now, are most of these places, are most of the facilities, or in your experience, like run like peer-to-peer, where they're like the older, more leveled up, advanced kids, like, do they run it?
So what's usually really common, I'm not going to say it's universal, but a very common arrangement is that you have kind of 4 levels of people at the program. So there are kind of the administrators at the top, like the executives, the program director, the owner, that kind of thing. And then you have a level of staff below them that are everyday staff, like what you might consider, techs at a rehab, the people that are with the kids day to day. You also have like your, counselors, therapists, whatever they call them, family representative, case manager, all those kinds of stuff, right?
Gotcha.
And then below that, you have a level of privileged kids that are still in the program that are usually called something like junior staff or interns or something of that level. So they have been there a while. They have moved up in the levels. They have a certain amount of trust. Like in a jail, you would call them a trustee.
Gotcha.
They kind of have a limited authority over other kids in the program, but they've got that sword of Damocles hanging over their head where if they mess up at all, they get dropped all the way back to the bottom. They're not
right.
They're not free to leave usually. They're not really. They're still in the program. They're still subject to the rules, but they have some authority over the other children. That's the newest ones, the lower level ones.
It occurs to me that these levels of, okay, so you have the staff and then you have the operational adults who manage the quote unquote program with levels of coercion, so that the senior kids have run the gauntlet of having to go up levels to get to a certain place of relative freedom or accountability. I don't know what the right word is, but they're under pressure by the program itself to enact
abusively
abuse on the younger kids, and if they don't, they can get knocked down too. So there's that system of enclosed kind of coercion,
and so what
that seems to be the biggest problem.
So then they feel complicit when they get out. They feel guilty. They feel complicit, and it makes them less likely to speak out about what happened.
And that's why people are called survivors.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So, I mean, because, if you, even under, coercion, if you kind of did what you had to do and play the game, it became an upper level. And I did that. I ended up, graduating the program. I went through the whole thing. I was there 30 months, almost to the day, and 2.5 years. And so, I had a lot of guilt, and I still do, over some of the stuff that I did as an upper level because I was trying to go home. But in the end, I was not the one that, put me in that situation. So, and so that makes the kids feel complicit in the abuse. And so one of two things happen. So they either feel guilty and they feel like they, not okay to speak out, right? Or they sign on wholeheartedly and, and they kind of get on the train. And so, and become, full supporters or whatever. And so either way, that insulates the program from, criticism once the kids get out. Because, the program knows you can only keep the kids for so long. I mean, they're going to turn 18 and leave. And then you don't have any control over them. And so, a lot of it is structured towards making sure that kids are not a problem, exerting that control after you leave the confines of the program.
Right. You want to get the kids indoctrinated as possible so that when they do leave, they're going to say, it was really beneficial for me because they're almost forced to, because if they say otherwise, then there's an amount of shame that's going to go along with that, in their peer group, in their community, with their parents. And their parents are going to be pissed, right? They're like, well, what have you done with my child?
Well,
this isn't what I paid for. Sure.
Yeah, and a lot of these kids come out, and if they're not 18, right, then they can be sent back, which is a huge threat. And even if they are 18 or whatever, they often are still kind of under their parents' financial support. And so they're dependent on their parents financially. And so, they don't have the freedom to kind of say what they think because, they are having to dance for their dinner, basically, right? The other interesting thing is that research shows that in these kinds of behavioral modification programs where they enforce the rules rigidly and kind of put that structure on, it does produce a behavioral change for a little while. So most research shows that within 6 months to a year, so most kids come out, they toe the line, they continue to kind of live by the structures that they learned in these programs. And then what happens is gradually that fades over 6 months to a year, and they break a little rule here and nothing happens. And they break a little rule there and nothing happens. And basically they kind of untrain themselves, deprogram themselves over that 6 months to a year. But a lot of times they still have to be putting on the front of, being the good kid because, maybe they went to college and their parents are paying for that, or maybe they are a huge emotional mess because of all the trauma that they've been through, and they're still being supported financially by their parents or whatever. But
that makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense because to touch on something you said, good or bad, and generally, from what my understanding is that coercive environments aren't beneficial regardless. But when you leave that structured environment and you're out again in the quote unquote real world, there's no one out there that's going to toe the line for you. Yeah. You've lost all that authority that you might have had once you were approaching graduation from one of these programs. No one's going to care about what you want them to do. And so I can understand how there'd be this internal conflict with someone getting released from one of these programs and then flung out into the world again and then not having any sort of bearing on reality as it relates to themselves, other people. I'm sure there's a lot of conflict that comes up probably fairly quickly with a lot of these young adults who get launched back out into the world after going through this. And I know this for a fact from people that I know and some anecdotes that I've been told about years and years and years and of struggling with how to navigate the real world, because so much of that time as a young person was spent in these environments.
Yeah.
And you don't actually get a chance to acclimate to what the real world is really like.
Sure. And we also see this with people exiting prison. We have a word for it, institutionalized, right? And so the other interesting thing is, what is the other consequence of that? So these kids are emotional wrecks. They're traumatized. They feel alienated from their friends and family because, you've been gone a year, 2 years. Your friends have moved on. They've got a whole new set of experiences, inside jokes, and all that, and you don't really fit in with them anymore because you're
the weird kid who got sent away.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so you're isolated. You're emotionally traumatized, some physically traumatized, often, and then what's the other consequence of that, right? So the whole time you're in the program, you often are. The program represents itself as mainstream psychiatric help. That's how they represent themselves to the parents. That's how they represent themselves to their kids. And so, these people call themselves counselors or therapists and then tell you literally that you're a piece of shit straight to your face, or that you deserved to be raped, or that you need to take some accountability for being raped or abused or whatever it is, right? And so these kids are, they come out and they are, terrified or angry or both of the psychiatric or mental health treatment community. And so they're not going to seek out a therapist because they expect that when they walk into the therapist's office that the therapist is going to yell at them, right? They expect that psychiatrists are out to have them committed or to just force pills down their throat, right? They don't have any understanding that these practices are, not really in line with what most psychiatrists or counselors or therapists would consider best practices or even acceptable practices, right? And so they're unlikely let's be honest, to get sent to one of these programs, I'm not saying everyone is mentally ill or anything like that, but, you probably have a higher instance of mental illness in this population than the population at large because, mental illness, particularly undiagnosed, untreated mental illness, is likely to lead to the kinds of behaviors in adolescence that get kids sent to these programs, right? And
not to mention the undiagnosed, untreated mental illness of the parents who send them there.
Sure.
It's right.
Yeah.
I mean, because there is some accountability there too, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
That, we don't like the idea that you can dispose of your child if it's quote unquote too much, or, we'd go on for another hour with that, but,
yeah. Well, it's funny.
No, it's important to remember that too, that, that I don't want to place any, not just not much, but any judgment on these kids who are sent to these programs at all. It's not fair. I don't know. We can't know the real story behind why they were sent there. In a lot of cases, we'll never know. But the important thing is that what happens while they're there, and then what happens to them once they leave. And I think I'm going to wrap it up. But thank you for talking. And I don't know if you're familiar with a gentleman by the name of Andrew Vax. He's a New York author, lawyer, child advocate, and he does he's a law guardian, and he'll take on 50 kids at a time, children who were abused under his guardianship,
a guardian
to be able to remove them from these bad environments.
Yeah.
And there's a quote I want to leave off with because it's interesting, and I've spoken to someone about this before. This is regarding the term survivors, and what his take on this is I think it's interesting because it provides maybe some hope for people who have gone through this kind of thing. And the quote is, "I believe that many people who were abused as children do themselves and their entire struggle a disservice when they refer to themselves as survivors. A long time ago, I found myself in the middle of a war zone. I was not killed, hence I survived. That was happenstance, just plain luck, not due to any greatness of character or heroism on my part. But what about those raised in a POW camp called childhood? Some of those children not only lived through it, not only refused to imitate the oppressor, but actually maintained sufficient empathy to care about the protection of other children once they themselves became adults and were out of danger. To me, such people are our greatest heroes. They represent the hopes of our species, living proof that there is nothing biogenetic about child abuse. I call them transcenders because surviving, i.e. not dying from child abuse, is not the significant thing. It is when chance becomes choice that people distinguish themselves. 2 little children are abused. Neither dies. One grows up and becomes a child abuser. The other becomes a child protector. One passes it on. One breaks the cycle. Should we call them both by the same name? Not in my book." Pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
It really is. And I want to do as much as I can to really do even a little bit to stop these practices and to at least bring awareness to people of regarding what's really going on. And even if it's just one person and we bring awareness to that one person, they're going to tell somebody else, and it will grow silently perhaps, but exponentially. I think that if we can be upset in this country about immigrant children who are torn away from their parents at the border for whatever reason, regardless of the reason. We
Yeah.
should be equally as upset that there's an industry devoted to tearing children away from their parents in this country. It's shameful. And
well, the irony has not been lost on our community.
Right. I can imagine.
And that's not to say, like, I feel for those kids so much, but it is. This is not new. It's just a different twist on an old story. So,
Right.
and even the troubled teen industry as it exists now is a twist on an old story of the Indian boarding schools, and that the United States ran and in Canada, that they had. And so, this is something that we are going to continue to repeat as a society until we decide that we are going to protect the rights of children, even against their own parents.
Absolutely. Well, let's keep on protecting the rights of children. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, and if I could just say real quick, if people want
Sure.
to learn more, they can check out our website. It's waspsurvivors.com. That's WWASP. They can check all that out. We've got survivor stories. We've got research. We've got detailed information on all the different programs from that network. And, they can reach out to us there as well.
We will put all that information in the show notes so that people can link directly off of the video. You can just email me that information, and I'll include it in the video description when I post this up on YouTube.
Terrific, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Great evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.